Hello and welcome to The Shane Show. I'm Shane Connick. Today we're going to bring in the Dean of the University of Maryland's Philip Merrill College of Journalism. Before that, she served as Executive Director of the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press for 12 years. She was also a reporter and editor for the St. Paul Pioneer Press before becoming a media lawyer for almost 5 years. An alumna of the University of North Dakota, Yale University Law School, and Vanderbilt University Law School, Dean Lucy Dalglish. Dean Dalglish, welcome to the Shane Show. Thank you for coming on today.
Thanks for inviting me, Shane. It's nice to see your face. If we can't be in person, it's great to see you on Zoom.
Of course, just as everything is going right now in the world and at most things in the College of Journalism this semester.
That's for sure. There's been no shortage of things going on within the college, both virtually and actually in Knight Hall and in Tawes Hall. It's been a very, very much more busy than normal.
Yeah, exactly. To get everything set and all that for this. So the last thing I was saying when I was introducing you was about how you attended Yale's and Vanderbilt's law schools. What kind of, you majored in journalism, I know, at North Dakota. What made you decide to go to law school and start studying that aspect of things?
Well, it was kind of always in the back of my mind that I might try law school. But when I was a reporter, I really, really enjoyed going to the courthouse and doing stories, watching trials, going through records. It's like every conflict that occurs in our society somehow ends up in court. You cover a bank robbery, you end up in court. There's a murder, you end up in court. A family dispute, you end up in court. There are so many interesting stories in a courthouse. And along the way, I met so many lawyers. And I'd always, since the time I was in journalism school, my favorite class was media law. And got to know some media lawyers through that and some media law researchers. And at a certain point, there was a fellowship that became available at Yale Law School. And the idea was that you would go to law school for 1 year, end up with a master's degree, but you would come out of there being very well equipped to cover justice. So I did that. I went back to my newspaper and covered the federal judicial system for a year or two, and then got on the editor track. And after I guess it was probably 6 years, I realized that if I ever wanted to finish my law degree, the credit was going to expire. So I quit my job and went to Vanderbilt. Some friends of mine had just started the Freedom Forum First Amendment Center at Vanderbilt. I knew I could work for them while I was finishing law school. So it's an incredible way to combine two passions, one for journalism and one for the law. I think it was, for me, it was the right thing to do.
And also, but was this something that you saw yourself doing back when you were at North Dakota studying journalism, and even before that when you knew that journalism was a possible career interest? Did you think that there was a chance that you'd end up going to multiple law schools and earning a Juris Doctor degree?
Yeah, I thought there was a chance I would go to law school. I think journalism is such a fabulous background for graduate school of any type, but in the back of my mind, I thought it was a possibility, particularly after I took that class. I just really, really enjoyed it.
And I know that you also do teach some classes in the Philip Merrill College of Journalism now. You're a dean and professor. Do you teach media law classes there?
Not really. I mean, I do a lot of guest lecturing in the media law classes. In fact, over the summer, one of the more interesting things I got to do was tape a series of mini lessons. I recorded them, and Professor Deb Nelson and Professor Sandy Beniski are going to be incorporating those little mini lectures on media law topics into their online courses for the fall. So I'm very curious to see how that works out. I gave a little mini, 5-minute tutorials on reporter's privilege and secret courts, prior restraints, news gathering. I'm not responsible for those classes, but it was fun to participate in them with these little, mini tutorials.
Yeah, of course, it has to be fun to be able to share knowledge that you've developed over this career with students who are in the college that you're overseeing.
It is.
And so shifting over back to toward journalism itself, you were quoted in a 2013 New York Times article saying that news sources are, quote, terrified now, and that what bothers you most is knowing that some of the really important stories in the recent past probably couldn't be done now. In what ways do you think that this is still true today, several years later?
I'm trying to remember that story, but and certainly the COVID pandemic puts a new twist on that. But the government's ability to figure out who your sources are and what it is they have given to you without your knowledge is something that's very different from when I was a young journalist. Back then, you would meet your confidential sources on a park bench. They would hand you a manila envelope, or it was almost like a spy-like dead drop, right? And for the government to know who your sources were, they would have to subpoena you and ask you. Now, technology has allowed the government to really do a lot more to figure out who you've been talking to and what you've been learning using technology. And as a result, some sources have been less willing to, answer questions or provide you with information. Luckily, we're still getting lots of information and really good stories from very brave people, but it takes a lot more cajoling to get some people to talk to you. They're also now with the way you and I are talking now on Zoom, I don't really know who has the ability to look at that. For all I know, it's the Chinese. We're all in a situation where I think we're more on guard and watching what we say. That's really too bad. So I oftentimes, once this pandemic is over, would recommend to journalists, do what you can to do it the old-fashioned way, if at all possible. If you can't encrypt your communications with someone, meet them in an out-of-the-way place, use burner phones, do whatever you can to not leave an electronic trail.
And you went on that article to say the public is in danger of learning only what the administration wants them to know. In 2014, you went on CNN and you said that while the White House does have far more on its website than it ever has before, the White House has made it almost impossible for its employees to speak to reporters without fear of their jobs or even going to jail. Now, this was under the Obama administration at that point. And now, in what ways do you think that this is even more relevant under the Trump administration when you think about the ways that people like Kayleigh McEnany and Mike Pence sometimes say certain things in order to ensure that they don't disappoint the president in any way or say things that he wouldn't approve of? Do you think that now you noticed this, like I said, under the Obama administration, do you think that these people, government figures, have to be even more fearful now?
Those are two entirely different problems. With the Obama administration, you were talking to a very loyal, disciplined group of people. And that White House was very tightly controlled. And the people in that administration, it was more difficult to get information out of them. They were very disciplined. They did not leak as much. They also knew what the law was, but they had respect for what journalists did. So they also were less likely than the previous administration to give journalists a break. They continued to pursue sources of journalists far beyond what I ever expected them to do. Now, when you're dealing with the Trump administration, my friends in the White House Correspondents Association tell me it's a completely different atmosphere. On a daily basis, at least up until recently, I haven't asked anybody about this in the last few months, they actually had relatively cordial relationships with the people working in the White House. They could get some information out of them, and a lot of those people, when they became disgruntled, would leak like a sieve. And it became a matter, I think, of trying to decide which faction within that White House was giving you the right information. They were kind of thinking on each other. And I think the books that you've seen coming out of former White House officials in the Trump administration sort of kind of give you an idea of what was going on there, what probably still is going on there. The Obama administration probably didn't release as much information as we would have liked, but you could more or less count on the information being true. This administration, you take what they say, and then you have to have your simultaneous fact checkers going on, or they're just trying to spin things. I knew we were in for a crazy time right after the inauguration, when the president kept insisting that his crowd was bigger than Obama's crowd at the inauguration. And you just looked at the overhead maps or the pictures, and you go, what? And then Sean Spicer, who was the spokesman at that time, was there trying to insist that no, the Obama crowd was much smaller than the Trump crowd. And I'm going, oh, you poor son of a gun. You must be up there in absolute torture because you know that's not the case. It's been an exercise in two entirely different frustrations. So it's hard to compare those two scenarios.
And so in your time covering anyone, have you ever had any experiences where you've had it could be harder to get information from certain people or certain people who you're working with who aren't as receptive as you'd like to reporters?
Oh, yeah. For 12 years when I was running the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press, we had a hotline and we took phone calls from journalists all over the country every day who were having trouble getting information, being admitted to press conferences where their colleagues were and they were kicked out, or being told that they can't have a piece of information, a document that they know is public under their state's open records law. And and the attitude of whoever it is that's denying the record is saying, yeah, you want it, sue us. And also from reporters who would be covering a criminal trial, and all of a sudden the prosecutor or the defendant would say, Your Honor, I want to close this down. I want you to kick everybody out. And the reporter in the audience was apparently the only person there who knew that the Supreme Court says you can't do that. So they would have to be the one to stand up and say, Your Honor, I believe this is an illegal closure of this particular proceeding. I ask you to give us a recess for a few minutes so I can call my editor and my lawyer. Because we're going to object to this. You've not had the hearing where you make findings of why this is necessary and how your closure order is narrowly tailored to meet the very specific interest that Mr. Prosecutor has identified. So they're every day, all over the country, there are situations that pop up. So yes, as a journalist, I was kicked out of hearings. I was kicked out of public meetings. I was denied records. You bet. I've had people come up here and tell me, I know you have that information, but you can't publish it. Every day is a new adventure when you're a journalist.
And on the flip side of that, was there anyone who you had the ability to cover or work with through your journalism work who you had a different view of, or maybe not a different view of, but who was particularly receptive or just a cool person to spend time with and speak with overall?
Oh, so many of them. Times are really different now, largely because of security. But when I was covering federal criminal justice, they would let you go in the back behind the courtrooms where the judges had their chambers. And I would go and I would just go from judges' chambers to judges' chambers and be able to talk to the judges themselves and say, I've got this file I was watching, can you talk to me about this? And I got to know some of the judges that also is something that made me want to finish my law degree. But my God, being a journalist is so incredible. The people you get to interview, the folks who've overcome obstacles or who were being mistreated or discarded by society in general. There were the famous people. You know, I got to sit down one time. I was almost speechless. I was very young and I almost stopped breathing. I got to interview Robert Redford. And oh my gosh, that was, I almost choked. I was so worked up about meeting Robert Redford. Sounds kind of silly now, but you have opportunities to do things and go places that other journalists don't. There are some experiences, I'm just thinking of some pictures I have. I got to go in a United States Air Force tanker and lay down in the back on my stomach next to the refueling guy while a fighter jet came up below the tail and watch them lower the nozzle and refuel a fighter plane. Who gets to do that? You know, it was cool. It was, you know, just experiences that you'll never forget.
And so as your journalism career went on, eventually you became the dean of the University of Maryland's Philip Merrill College of Journalism. Is this form of education or this form of you know, this career path anything that you saw yourself doing?
No, not really. No. At one point before I went to law school, I considered, you know, if something were to happen in my journalism career and I wanted to do something else, maybe I would teach. But the opportunity to finish my law degree in 2 years presented itself. And I was going to be a media lawyer. And I was a media lawyer at a Minneapolis law firm for about 5 years. And then the opportunity to go to the Reporters Committee presented itself. And I thought, well, you know, if I don't try it, I'll always regret it. I was single at the time. I didn't have anyone really to worry about except myself. And I thought, you're going to regret this if you don't at least give it a try. You can always move back to Minnesota and, you know, do something else. And then I was enjoying my job at the Reporters Committee. I'd been there about 12 years and I'd kind of mastered it. And I had given guest lectures at Merrill College. And I'd gone to SPJ meetings and conferences that they had held there when they opened the new building. And so when they were looking for a new dean, somebody nominated me, and the head of the search committee contacted me and said, "You've been nominated." And I said, I kind of chuckled and I said, "Oh, really? That's really nice. I'm really flattered. Thank you very much, but I don't think so." And that was on a Thursday. And my husband on Sunday night said, "I think you better call that guy from Maryland back because you haven't talked about anything else for 4 days. And I think you should at least go talk to those people." So I did, and here we are.
That's great. And also something about specifically I talk about on this show a lot, a big thing I talk about is sports and sports journalism and different things in sports. And I know that you told the Shirley Povich Center for Sports Journalism in the Philip Merrill College of Journalism that one of the benefits of coming to Maryland was its sports journalism program. With that said, how important do you think that journalism is and the role that it plays in sports?
Well, I think we're going to see, well, right now is a really great example of why journalism is important to sports. Because if it weren't for journalism, the public would not be watching any professional sports, or probably the collegiate sports that are going to be going on for the rest of this school year. I think there is a connection that sports is a reflection of our society. And most people are never going to have the opportunity to go speak to that athlete or interact with them in some way. So sports journalists provide that connection not only with individual games and individual sports, but the best sports journalists also are very introspective, and they tell us a lot about the role sports plays in our society. And in this country, sports plays a very, very big role.
And also, with that said, so you've taught classes in the Philip Merrill College of Journalism. You get to jump in on classes a lot, like you were saying. What is one thing that if you're talking to aspiring journalists, something that you would tell them about the career in order to help them learn more at this point and help them expand what they know about journalism?
Well, I think I would start by saying, if you are curious, if you're a curious person, and you always want to know why something happens, and you're interested in the world around you, journalism is a fantastic career. If you love to write, that's great. If you love to shoot video, that's great. I went into journalism because I always wanted to know what was going on in the world. And I thought I'd be just closer to figuring it out. I always wanted to know what was happening around me. And journalism is a fantastic way to do that. Also, if you're a disciplined journalist, you know how to take information, evaluate fact from fiction most of the time. You know how to present it in a way so that an audience can understand it. Journalism is a fantastic background for going to law school, because many of those tendencies and traits are the same. You're gathering information, you're doing something with it, and you're producing something, a piece of advocacy versus a piece of journalism. But if you have gone to a good journalism school, you're going to come out of there knowing how to talk to people, you're going to know how to write. And sometimes you're going to learn how to speak very, very well. You know, when I first became dean, the university sent out a survey to a lot of alumni and said, you know, what's the one thing that you wish the University of Maryland would have done or prepared you for that you didn't get? And a lot of the students in the sciences in particular said, I wish someone would have told me how often in a professional setting I was going to have to speak in front of others and write something for people. Nobody told me that I was going to be expected to do that. Well, that's one thing you're going to learn how to do in journalism. You're going to learn how to speak to people, gather information from people, and you're going to learn how to present it in a way that others can understand. It will prepare you brilliantly for so many other professions if you decide that journalism is just not what you're interested in.
Journalism truly is a very unique field, and it's one that you, as you start to go through it more and you're constantly learning new things, constantly seeing truths, constantly interacting with people. And like you said, very good point about your speaking. The whole thing is communications. You're speaking with people, you're writing things, and overall you're, like you said, getting in front of people and doing things of that nature. Dean Dalglish, thank you so much for taking the time to come on to the show today.
You're welcome, Shane. It was lovely to see you, and I hope I get to see you in person very soon.
Hopefully. Thank you, everybody, for tuning into this edition of The Shane Show. We'll see you next time. Catch you on the flip side.